having me. Let me just get myself situated here. Okay, so I am very, very good at thinking. One might say that I am a world-class thinker, having spent the last 40 or so years honing my craft. And if there was an award for spending the most time in one's head, I would probably have it hanging in the wall of my office. So I spent my childhood years using my imagination to think of just about anything and everything. Heck, I even thought up a plan to build a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man straight out of Ghostbusters when I was 10. Letting go that it probably wasn't even possible, right, for my 10-year-old self to do that. You know, I've thought up novel ideas, I've thought up songs, I've thought up poems. I even thought my way through primary school and college. And I even thought my way through moving my major from being an English major to being, sorry, let me flip that around because now I'm thinking too. I thought my way through changing my major from being a computer science major to an English major because, man, computer science is hard, y'all. And then I graduated and I thought my way into a job as a third shift manager at a Walgreens. Okay. It's an interesting term, but I had to make money, so what else was I going to do? And that thinking, because I had lots of thinking to do as a third shift manager at a Walgreens, brought me to moving out of Wisconsin down to Illinois to live with my dad and do the whole IT thing and pretend that I was a mortgage broker for about a year. Closed one loan. One. I'm very proud of that loan. And I had more thinking to do. More and more thinking. That thinking just kept on going on and going on. And so that thinking sent me to my first real IT job because the thought that kept on going through my mind is, well, I can make a lot of money doing IT work. I'm pretty good at it, setting aside that whole programming computer science thing. And then, once I got into those jobs, well, my thinking kept on going. And it kept on going, saying, Russ, you better keep this job, or else. Or else you're going to get fired, and you're not going to have any money anymore. And that would be really bad. And so, it's no surprise then that my thinking kept on going and kept on going. And one of those thoughts that came up was, you know, I don't think I'm happy right now. I don't think that I'm feeling fulfilled right now. So my thinking, doing what my thinking does, brought me to my first therapist. And my first therapist, he was great at thinking with me. Which turns out wasn't super helpful. And so I didn't really change, and I didn't really go anywhere. I did take a bunch of really nice psychology tests, though, to better get to know my thinking. And so I found myself a different therapist, and I moved to Chicago, and one day, thanks to that new therapist, I discovered New Thought. And I remember the day that I discovered New Thought clearly because I was at Gideon Square in Chicago for a peace festival. It was not a particularly nice day out. It was in the first week of May, and in the first weeks of May it can be rainy and cold and horrible, and this day did not disappoint. And I was not in a particularly nice mood that day either, because my thinking was running in full force, telling me what a waste of time this peace festival was. I'm standing around all these weird people, and the only thing that I want to see here is the gong wash. So I wasn't in the best mood. I sat through the gong wash, and I'm grateful for the gong wash. It was a beautiful gong wash, even though it was cold and I was a bit sniffly from the humid air, and I was wallowing in my thinking. And that festival close with a panel of 4 seemingly wise people speaking about peace. It's the kind of thing you'd see at a peace festival, right? Now, I don't remember what all of them said, but I do remember that there was one person who stood out, a man named Darrell Jones. Some of you may know him if you've been in the movement for a while. He's a minister in Chicago. He wasn't a minister then, but when he was speaking on peace, I noticed that there was something grounded about the way that he was speaking that seemed to short-circuit my thinking mind. And I felt spaciousness. I felt the peace that he was talking about. It wasn't just in my head. I actually felt that peace. And I'm like, what's going on? This is pretty interesting. And then I had a thought. Well, that guy, he really knows who he is. I want that. And of all of the thoughts that had been directing my life up until that point, that particular one would prove to be one of the most profound and life-changing for me. Because what his example was guiding me to do was to let go of thought altogether. It turns out that thinking was my biggest problem. So I did a little like cyber stalking with Reverend Darrell. And I found out that he was at the Moody Spiritual Center in Chicago, and I began attending their services, learning about this thing called the science of mind that we're all learning about here, and beginning my path toward becoming a licensed practitioner, and then later the minister who's standing here before you today. So, good morning, my friends. I'm RevRussLegear. And I'm probably the only new thought minister that you're going to hear this year who is going to tell you that thought, it turns out, actually is the problem and not the solution. So our theme for August is passion and purpose. And last week you heard from Reverend Suzanne about how passion that comes from the soul can energize us and it can help us to find and fulfill our purpose in the world. And today I'm going to talk about how I've learned that authentic passion and purpose don't actually come from my thoughts, or rather they come from something much deeper and more fundamental. Many spiritual paths call this something that I'm talking about the ground of being. In some traditions, they call it the self with a capital S. In fact, that's what psychology calls it. In Buddhism, this is considered awakening or enlightenment, or bodhi. In Hinduism, it's commonly called nirvana. In Christianity, and also in science of mind, we call it the Christ consciousness. And I'm particularly fond of the Sufi Islam term for this, haqiqat, which translates to reality or truth. Isn't that wonderful? Love that. So regardless of what we call it, there is one common thread that we can trace through each of these spiritual paths when we talk about the ground of being, and that's this. When we reach our ground of being, we are no longer suffering. And the reason for that is because suffering is the product of us feeling separate from life, feeling separate from ourself, that self with a big old capital S. And when we're in our ground of being, we no longer see division, even though we do experience individuality. So it turns out that for much of my life, the reason why I felt like I wasn't grounded in the world, why I wasn't able to tap into my passion and purpose, why I was always suffering, was because I didn't realize that there was a me that was beyond my thoughts. I thought that I was my thoughts. Are you familiar with the philosopher, scientist, and mathematician Rene Descartes? And he had that famous axiom, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. And I believe that much of our society is grounded around that phrase. But I'm going to share something today that might feel a little radical, so stick with me. I believe that that phrase is fundamentally flawed because what it assumes is that thought is the ground of being. But I've discovered that there is something deeper than that. There is something deeper beyond thought. So a year or so into my time at the Bodhi Spiritual Center, I had my very first real experience with my own ground of being. I was taking a class that Reverend Mark Anthony Lord had created based on experiences that he had at the Oneness University in Chennai, India. And part of this class was a day-long workshop where we went into this very deep meditative state. And in that state, we invited our divine self, the ground of our being, to help us to go deeper, and then deeper, and then deeper. So that with the aid of the ground of being, we might heal any beliefs or thoughts or ideas that were holding us back from truly experiencing the love that is at the center of our being. Now, what's interesting, for me anyway, is that nobody told us how we were going to do this. Nobody said, here's how you get your divine self to take you deeper. Instead, all we were told was to ask that divine self to take us deeper, and then trust that it would. Trust that our divine self knows what to do, knows how to do it. And it must have worked because it wasn't long before the room is filled with people who are crying and laughing and screaming and having all of their various divine experiences, because we're all in our ground of being together. And that was pretty fabulous, even though there's tears flooding out of my eyes. So part of this process, once we were at the ground of being, is we entered into forgiveness. And I had an opportunity to forgive my parents, forgive my grandparents, to ask them to forgive me, my transgressions, to forgive all of our ancestors. And as I allowed my divine self to take me deeper and deeper, I noticed something really fascinating. My thoughts were no longer wanting to control everything. They had relaxed. They had let go. And as they let go, I was overcome with this feeling of love and peace and well-being. I felt connected to everything. Especially felt connected to everyone else who was in the room with me, who was sharing in this experience. And toward the end of this process, I had a vision. That vision sticks with me today. It was so vivid. I had a vision where I was sitting on top of this high plateau, looking out across this valley at dusk. The stars starting to come out at night. And as I looked down into this valley, I saw all of these pinpricks of light. And each one of these pinpricks of light was a campfire. And in that moment, I knew that around each and every one of those campfires was my ancestors. Each and every person, thousands and thousands and thousands of people over thousands of years, who all conspired, whether they knew it or not, to help me to be there in that moment. It was profound, and it was all without thought. So I didn't realize what it was called then. I didn't have the language for it, but what had happened is I had access to my ground of being. And over the years, I would get more snippets, more glimpses of that feeling of freedom, of boundlessness, typically from some form of what I'll call more traditional meditation, and it'll make sense when we do our meditation later, but also sometimes from spiritual mind treatment. Often I would have that feeling when I felt hiking in the wilderness. But it was not until just this last year that I landed on a practical, repeatable method that's grounded in not just wisdom teachings, but also in science. Now, why do I find that important? Well, one of the things that I appreciate the most about our Science of Mind teaching is that word science. I'm a very pragmatic person. I love science with a nerdy passion, and I find it very helpful with my practice to know what works for me. In fact, not just what works for me, but also works for others, because my job is ministry after all, so it's helpful to know these things. And I recall that Ernest Holmes himself, the founder of our movement, he always encouraged us not to take his word for what he shared with us, but instead to try it out and see if it worked. And he also invited us to be open at the top for learning new things, because he knew he didn't have all of the answers. He was doing the best that he could with the information that he had, and he did a great job. And here we are, almost 100 years later, actually 100 years later now, I think, getting there. We get to continue to evolve and continue to figure it out and continue to find new ways to express that spirit that's at the center of our being. Isn't that fun? I think it's fun. So here's the very first important thing that I learned when I landed on my own process for this. My own process for getting in touch with my divine self. And that is this: thought is not who I am. I am not my thoughts. In fact, what I've discovered is that thought is more like one of our senses, like sight and hearing and smell and taste and touch. Buddhism teaches this, in fact. And many Buddhist traditions consider thought to be a sixth sense. But Buddhism knows that it is not who we are. And the reason for this is pretty interesting. It's because thought is just another way for us to know and to experience the world around us. Just like sight allows us to experience the world, hearing allows us to experience the world, thought allows us to make meaning out of the world. So I think of it then as a useful tool. And when I think of that, I'm then invited to reflect on who's the one who's using the tool. So I first learned this while reading a book called The Way of Effortless Mindfulness by Locke Kelly. And when I did, I almost jumped out of my chair. Have you ever had that experience where you're reading something and it just feels so true, but nobody's ever put it into those words before, and you're like, yes, that's the thing. I've always believed this, but he told me what it is. This is great. Well, that happened to me. And I realized then that I am still me, even in the spaces between each thought that I have. Have you noticed that you'll have a thought, but there's also spaces between those thoughts? And so that got me thinking, how is it that I can know something even though I don't always have a thought about it? The thought thickens. So to give you an example, last week I went for this nice walk at Sugarloaf Ridge State Park. Those of you who are from the Santa Rosa area probably remember Sugarloaf, and it's one of my all-time favorite places to go hiking. It's this beautiful valley that's surrounded by hills and mountains, and since it's enclosed from all of the towns around it, it's very serene and very quiet. And last week I walked on the Vista Trail, which takes you up about 600 feet onto this goat path that runs along the ridge. And you get this beautiful panoramic view of the valley. And about halfway up there is a clearing on the side of the hill. It's covered in rocks. It's got some trees. Some of them are alive. Some of them were burnt down from the last fire, sadly. And it's very serene up there. and you have this panoramic view of everything around you. So, being that I like to do this, I got out my hiking chair, I put it together, and I sat my butt down. And I just observed everything. I saw the yellow tall grasses down in the valley, gently swaying in the breeze. I saw the forested hills on the other side of the valley and saw how they're punctuated with the occasional vineyard. Off in the distance, there was this hazy town. And when I looked up, I saw the blue sky with wispy clouds lazily moving along. And then I closed my eyes and I could feel that calm breeze tickling my skin. I could hear the blue jays complaining. And I heard the whispers of leaves. And in that moment, I felt as though I knew everything that I was experiencing. I could feel that wind within me. I could feel the freedom of that blue sky. I could feel the life of the tall grasses and the trees and the deer and the turkeys. And I felt as though I knew myself just a little bit better. So this is the power of being able to move past thought. Because I know that if in that moment I was in my thinking mind, I'd be trying to analyze everything, I'd be planning out my week and all the things that I need to do for work, I would be thinking about all the people that I was judging in my mind. Am I the only one who does that? But I didn't, and because I didn't do that, because I allowed my thoughts to relax, I was able to be one with this perfectly beautiful moment. And I was able to move past my thoughts in that moment because I had learned how to practice becoming aware of the spaces between my thoughts by becoming aware of the spaces between everything. Now, this might sound like an odd practice, but hear me out. This is actually a practice that comes out of the Dzogchen tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, and it's a way for us to become aware of that awareness that is our ground of being. In fact, did you know that we are aware even before we take our very first thought? Who here's held a baby? Notice how those babies' eyes seem to stare through your soul? That's the ground of being. That's awareness. So I'm going to share a practice with you today, and I adapted it from one of the meditations out of that book that I mentioned, The Way of Effortless Mindfulness. And don't worry, the best part about this method that I'm going to show you is that you do not need years of meditating cross-legged in an ashram to do it. You can actually do it anywhere. In fact, I'm doing it a little bit right now. So what I'm going to do just to help aid us with this is I'm going to play my flute. Now, you don't need a flute to do this. I'm just using the flute because I find it helpful for illustrating the example. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a series of notes, and as I'm playing, I invite you to focus your attention as though you're directing a flashlight onto each series of notes. And I find it helpful to close my eyes for this practice, and you can do that too if that feels comfortable for you. Get a little water. Okay. So focusing on the series of notes. Okay. Now I am going to play another set of notes, but this time I invite you to focus your awareness on the silent spaces between each series of notes. Just observe how you feel and what happens when you do this. So did you notice anything different in the silence? Did you notice perhaps that your thinking maybe wasn't as loud as it typically is? So I'm going to do one more set of notes. And I invite you to continue focusing your awareness on the spaces between those notes. But also, I invite you to allow your awareness that's aware of those spaces to then become aware of itself. Almost as though you're putting up a mirror so that your awareness can see itself. Okay? Doing? Did you notice that you are able to be aware without thinking? Just raise some hands. It's okay if you didn't, by the way. Okay. Great. So this is a practice. And I'm able to do this every day because I do it every day. And so it's become much easier to me, just like the more we practice riding the bike, the better we get at riding our bike. And what you can do is you can simply take a moment to pause and observe with your awareness the spaces between the sounds that you hear, the spaces between objects. I'm doing it in this room here. It's so spacious. When I'm hiking, I like to become aware of the spaces between the leaves and the trees, the sounds that I hear. Sometimes I even feel as though my awareness is filling up the spaciousness of the sky. And I love this practice because what it does is it helps my mind to feel more spacious. It's as though my awareness expands to fill all of those spaces that I'm observing. And I notice that I don't have to suppress my thoughts then, like I'm willing my way through it, which doesn't work, by the way. Tried, I've got lots of practice. But instead, my thoughts actually have room to breathe. And they get to naturally relax. And once they relax, I'm able to feel my own grounded being. And from that, that's when the magic happens. That's when I become inspired and I feel my passion and I feel my purpose. Life becomes easier, it becomes more effortless. I find more joy in all of the simple experiences of life. I don't have to try as hard in life. Yet strangely, I seem to get more work done. And even my thinking improves because rather than allowing the tool to use me, I'm able to use that tool from the wisdom of the ground of my being. And best of all, as I first observed with Reverend Darrell Jones, I find that I better know who I am. Instead of holding on to that phrase, I think, therefore I am, instead my mantra becomes, awareness is aware, therefore I am. My path becomes a little bit more clear and a little bit less of a vague and confusing mystery. And even my relationships are less challenging because my thoughts are no longer trying to judge them and control them. I find myself directly experiencing life rather than filtering it and interpreting it through my thoughts, trying to make meaning out of every single experience that I have. In short, I feel free. And this is the freedom that I wish for each of you as we all grow together in our passion and our purpose from the ground of our being. So shall we take that into some short prayer? How good it is to know that that ground of being is here now. It is here now just as it is everywhere. Seen and unseen, it truly is the source of all. It is love, it is life, it is joy, and I know that it is me. I know that it is each and every person in this room. Each of us spring forth from that ground of being. Each of us are the love, the life, and the joy that comes from that ground of being. So I just bless us on our journeys today, knowing that that ground of being is guiding us, it is sustaining us, it is bubbling forth and allowing our thoughts to relax. I know that it is sharing its wisdom with us, its passion and its purpose. And I know that as we rest in that ground of being, the goodness of that divine one finds its way through us, blessing each and everything that we experience and each and everything that we do, blessing us to no end. And so I am grateful for this. Grateful to know this prayer is already fulfilled. And I release this word into the action of that law that always says, yes, my beloveds, yes. And together we say, so it is.